I think that, Ed definitely taught Mike some stuff, but I just have a really hard time swallowing that Dave had anything to do with Ed's solos. I mean, come on, think about what you're talking about. David Lee Roth can play guitar, but he can't play, he strums on an acoustic guitar, but he's not. Eddie Van Halen's a master guitar player. How are you going to tell a master guitar player how to play guitar? That's insane. I've never heard of anybody mouthing a solo for any guitarist in my life. Have you heard of this, Dave?
No, I haven't. But then again, I don't play, so I don't know. But I think that's believable in terms of Dave saying, they hear the song and Dave's like, you know what I hear? I hear dun 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 dun, and that's right. Like, oh, you mean like this? And he works on it from there. I mean, maybe. I think that's believable every once in a while. But the unbelievable part is him saying, well, I taught Mike the bass solo. I mean, it's his solo, for crying out loud. You're telling me you taught him how to play his own solo?
Right, that's what's wild, yeah.
I mean, come on. I think that's just Ed trash talking about Mike.
Yep, that's for sure.
I'm sure he went over some bass parts with him because that's what Ed heard in his head. But please don't take away from the fact that the guy can play. The guy can play. He's more than competent. It's just that, because of Ed's style, there wasn't a lot of room for Mike to do anything crazy. And he knew that, and he accepted that. And the other thing is they held him down so much that they never really let Mike stretch all that much anyway. I mean, certainly not towards the end. I mean, certainly not like in the Sammy era. Mike has a lot of good stuff, like, say, on Women and Children First.
Right.
There's a lot to hear on there. And actually, there's also a lot to hear on For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge.
Right.
But that's because he had a producer who was sympathetic to a bass player in a band, and that's why you actually heard him.
Sure.
So, to the person who wrote in the letter, I hear what you're saying, and it's not impossible. But just like to the level that was being accused of, no, it was not. It was not that much.
Right.
I don't think, anyway.
Letter number 13 comes from Daryl Alba. He says, douche chills is indeed a known recent term and the perfect way to describe Dave's 1995 shows. I got them watching him in 1995. So, douche chills is a thing. So, Dave, you got to put that in your vocabulary. Have you heard?
Wow, didn't know. But I do agree that 1995 is definitely a year to get them.
That's for sure. Letter number 14 comes from Heath McCoy, and he says, here's hoping the second crack at Vegas does not go down in flames similarly with David Lee Roth. Heath, I think he knows this, and that's why he is firing different people in his band to get it right. Dave, what do you think?
Man, you know what? I'm going to hold off judgment until I actually see the show.
Right. And letter number 15, the last letter of the night, Dave's favorite. It's when comes from Brad Martell. And Brad says, I encourage everybody to look up the 2012 Esquire interview with Eddie Van Halen for a glimmer of hope that Van Halen will ride again once everybody's good to go. Eddie says point blank that the band owes the fans new music and he doesn't like to tour without it. About David Lee Roth, he says word for word that they've never hated each other. Funny enough, considering that Dave said that in recent interviews, but he also dropped some nice words about what they did with Sammy. And I think everyone should revisit this interview from some real useful clues to the piece this puzzle together. And that comes from Brad Martell. Yes, thank you, Brad. I just took that interview out again after you mentioned that, and I reread it. And Eddie was pretty candid here. He talked about being nervous before every gig, believe it or not. He said a different kind of truth was 1/3 old, 1/3 middle, and 1/3 new. And he said there's many songs that they had that are not recorded. He said David Lee Roth is not an act. He says what you see is real. That's who he is. And he never hated Dave, and he said the press blew it out of proportion, and he was blindsided by leaving when Dave left. He did say that they argue about the songs, but nothing is really personal. And in terms of the Sammy material, they said, what are you going to do with all that Sammy material? And he said, that material is sort of on vacation. It's off to college. Which is but that is an interesting interview. I have to say, it's good for you to bring that up, Brad, because I think people should take a look at that. Go online, just type in Eddie Van Halen and Esquire 2012, and that interview will come up. Oh, do you remember this interview, Dave?
Vaguely, and all I'm going to say is I heard what Ed said, but that was 7 years ago, and things change in 7 years.
No, that's for sure. Everything's changed. And that wraps up the mailbag segment. And we are on to all kinds of stuff. We have a full course dinner for you guys. So we have a report from the Eddie Van Halen Con from Dan Nainan. And we also have Winner Chickenfoot Dinner, where we analyzed the 2009 Chickenfoot self-titled debut album on its 10th anniversary. And then we also do an interview with Darin Bristow, who is the director of Get It Up, the animated video that Chickenfoot did. And that is all coming up next. Take a listen.
I think we're just a from-the-heart rock and roll band, you know? They always try to pigeonhole you, you know.
Now that there's speed metal and trash metal and all that, it's not quite so humiliating. No, I got stupid there. But you know what I mean? It's like, you don't mind it as much. When that was like this outrageous, unthought of music, this trash, you know, what they call trash metal now, which I think is great, but I'm saying, but when heavy metal was considered like the unmusic thing, it was an insult, because this band is very musical. It's probably one of the most musical rock bands around, I think, you know.
It's the most musical band I've ever been in.
Author Greg Renoff is back with a new book, Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music. The new biography of the record producer Ted Templeman, who went on to produce Van Halen, the Doobie Brothers, Van Morrison, Aerosmith, Sammy Hagar, and more. The book, which runs $19.95, is being released on April 21st, 2020, and it's currently available for pre-orders at Amazon.com. From the man who brought you Van Halen Rising comes Ted Templeman, A Platinum Producer's Life and Music, written by Templeman as told to Greg Renoff. Available for only $19.95 for pre-order at Amazon.com. Order it today.
Hey, this is Ron Wixo, former drummer with David Lee Roth. You're listening to Dave and Dave Unchained.
Need a laugh? Check out the Funny How Comedy Podcast, which focuses on upbeat conversations with legendary comedians. It's free on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out on Facebook at Funny How Comedy Podcast, on Twitter at Funny How Podcast, on Instagram at Funny How Comedy Podcast, or email us at funnyhowcomedypodcast@gmail.com.
We don't plan anything. It just comes. And it's actually a strange phenomenon. When we get in the studio and whoever it may be coming up with the seed of an idea, it just snowballs. You know? We'll get excited and, you know, and a lot of times it starts out with a drum beat.
Hey, this is Dan, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the EVH Con that I attended on Sunday, November 3rd in Greenwich, Connecticut. Now, this was held at Greenwich Music, and I walked into the place not knowing quite what to expect, and, well, I was immediately blitzed by this incredible wall of sound. I think it was at least 3 guitars, and it sounded like they were at full blast coming out of these amps, and I have to say I was pretty flabbergasted. It was so loud that I actually had to put earplugs in, and fortunately I carry earplugs for airplanes, you know, with crying babies, or at events when DJs play the music too loud. I think what happens is DJs get more and more desensitized to loud volume, so they keep turning it up louder and louder, which in turn makes them even more deaf. It's, I guess, sort of like an alcoholic who gets a higher tolerance for alcohol. But anyway, I digress. So it was just awesome. All of these guys were all playing Van Halen licks. They were all phenomenal. It was incredible. And as I looked around, it looked like the store had been turned into a shrine for Eddie Van Halen. I mean, there had to have been at least 20 or 30, maybe 40 EVH guitars of all kinds, some I'd never seen before. I mean, you'd had, of course, the Frankenstrat clones, and then you had like the black and white, and then you have the black and gray stripes. I mean, designs I'd never really seen before. And there was actually one EVH Frankenstrat replica that looked just like the original. I mean, with the cigarette burns and the quarter from the same year. It was so realistic, and I thought, man, this must be one of those $25,000 replicas. Then eventually some of the guys started playing Van Halen songs, and there was a guy who was an incredible bass player, and he was actually doing some eruption on the bass, and I was like, this guy's incredible. So he was on bass, there was a guy on drums, and then guitar players would come up one by one and play random Van Halen songs. There wasn't really a singer to speak of, and I guess the bass player went and did pretty much all the vocals, but it was awesome. And let me tell you, to a person, to a man, every one of these players was amazing. I mean, there must have been at least 20 guys there, and near as I could tell, they all know pretty much every Van Halen song from both the Dave and Sammy eras, and who knows, maybe even Sharoni, heaven forbid. But it was just awesome. And now I play Van Halen, and I know a lot. I mean, Eruption and Spanish Fly on guitar, but I have to be honest, I was pretty intimidated by these guys, and I was afraid to play on stage, to be honest. But I played for a few hours, and it was amazing to hear the songs, and again, the technical brilliance was beyond compare. There was a kid who was 16 years old and got up and played a couple of songs like Somebody Get Me a Doctor. I mean, he had the leads absolutely perfect. So I interviewed him for the podcast as well. So all in all, an absolutely amazing experience. I got to interview Jim Suma, the owner of Greenwich Music, who has put this convention on now 5 years in a row, this being the 5th year. Also got to interview a really interesting guy named Adam Reaver, who helped develop the D-Tuner, which will tune your guitar down to drop D for songs like Unchained, etc. And he also works with FU Tone, and he's been to 5150 numerous times, and that was really cool. All in all, it was an amazing event. Everyone there knew their Van Halen trivia, that's for sure. And somebody called out something about how many say I, making fun of Eddie's singing. And I was kind of bummed there wasn't a keyboard. Jim said there was a keyboard last year, and of course I know Jump note for note on the keyboard. But it was incredible to be there. And what was also awesome is how loud it was. And being in an apartment in Manhattan, New York, I don't really get to play with an amp, and I don't get to play loud ever at home, so it was awesome to hear it. It was earth-shaking and thunderous, and you could just feel it in your gut, and the sound, the amps and the effects were amazing. So what's your name?
John Barry.
Hey, John. So I just saw you play. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Congratulations. How long have you been playing guitar?
Since I was like 8, and I'm 16 now, so that's like, I'm getting there.
I think I have T-shirts that are older than you.
Oh, God.
So how did you first get started with, what Van Halen, and how did that affect you?
Well, my dad is a huge Van Halen fan. Well, any rock, you know what I mean?
Right.
And he got me the Guitar Hero game. You know the Guitar Hero? It's like buttons.
Oh, yes.
I started on that for like maybe a year or two, and then for Christmas I got a new guitar.
Is your dad here?
Yeah, he's right there.
Oh, we'll talk to him after.
Yeah.
Great. I guess how many guitars do you have?
I only have like 3, and I only use like two main ones,
Now, I've dabbled in some Van Halen myself, and but I can tell you have like the notes exactly right.
Yeah.
Did you learn that?
Oh no, okay. Did you learn that by ear, or did you do YouTube videos, tab?
YouTube's huge. YouTube. You just slow it down. Watch what Eddie's doing. Tutorials all over. You know?
Now, do you play in a band or anything, or?
Yeah, Adam and the Metal Hawks. If you search us up on Facebook, YouTube,
oh, okay.
We do original music, you know.
And how